Earlier this year, I've been pretty impressed by a new publisher. The publisher is called Revolution Games, and they have published a game called Washington Crossing, and that game, design-wise and production-wise, was a very worthy effort. So I became curious when I learned that another game was being published by Revolution Games. This game is called Cells. It is the game I'm reviewing today. Cells is a game about the Battle of the Bulge. What a surprise! The Bulge being probably the single most gamed topic in the history of wargaming, certainly one of the most popular. Still, new games about that topic are coming out, and I'm still playing them and enjoying them because that's a very interesting topic. Actually, this is not a game about the entire Battle of the Bulge, but only about a section of that battle. And in fact, this is the first game in a projected series called Battles of the Bulge. Interesting idea, I think, and I wonder if one day these games can be combined together in a monster game, but for now we have the first small introductory level game in this new system. Here we have a section of the Battle of the Bulge that shows a push from the German units to rush towards the Meuse River, and on the other hand, of course, you have mainly American and some British units that will try to stop the Germans, to slow them down, to prevent them from gaining too much ground. In any case, this is a general idea. Let me show how the game works. This is the map of the game. It is printed on paper. It shows an intricate net of roads and paths, which are of course very important as they are in any game about the Ardennes, because as soon as units start moving out of their paths, of the roads, then of course moving becomes extremely problematic and slow. This is the setup of the game. There are only 4 German units on the map at the beginning of the first turn, and a number of American and British units on the map there. They will act as reinforcements. However, there are many units, there's quite a good number of units that is scheduled to enter the game in the following turns, actually starting already in turn 1. German reinforcements will enter the map from these 2 edges here, and the American reinforcements will enter from the northern edge and from this area here. What the Germans are trying to do is to take control of hexes adjacent to this river here. If they do so, it is assumed that the Germans have started crossing the river. And the more units they have adjacent to this river, and for the longer that happens, the more points the Germans score. Actually, the Germans may score enough points in this way that will grant them early victory. The game does not even go until the last turn. The Germans just win. If the Allies prevent that from happening, then you play until the end of the last turn, which is the day turn of December 27th. And at that point, you count victory points that are based on, well, still the points that the Germans may have earned by having units adjacent to the river. On top of that, there are points that are issued for control of key cities on the map and for elimination of steps of enemy units. This is a chit pool game. The players have their own individual activation cup in which they place activation chits. When one of these chits is drawn, the corresponding formation activates, but then players also have tactical chits that grant several advantages. When one of these chits is drawn, it goes in an area of the map called available tactical chits, and that chit can be used later for the printed advantage when an activation chit is drawn. That means that if you draw all of your activation chits and complete all of your actions before you have drawn all of your tactical chits, you do not get to use the advantages of the chits that you have not drawn, because at the end of the turn, all counters and all activation and tactical chits go back in the cup. So that creates a little bit of unpredictability. Also, the number of activation cheats that you have each turn changes, the number and type. The Germans start with only 2 activation cheats in the activation cup, the Allies with only 1 activation cheat and 4 tactical cheats. Then here you have a schedule that indicates the type and number of tactical cheats that you place in your cup. As you can see, that number increases over time overall, but it diminishes in the last day of the fight. However, there's another twist here. The turn track is divided in night turns and day turns with different modifiers that apply to each type of turn, but also each turn has a different number of green boxes and gray boxes printed on it. That number of boxes indicates the number of action cheats that each player can actually use in a turn. For example, in turn 1, the American player can use 1 activation cheat and the German player 2. Sometimes, I should say often, that number corresponds to the number of action cheats, activation cheats that you have in your cup. Turn 1, the German player can use 2, has 2, will use all of them. So in these turns, the drawing of the cheats simply indicates the order in which units will be activated. There are other turns, however, in which the number of actions and the number of cheats in your cup do not correspond. Look at December the 25th, the day turn. The Germans have 3 actions available. They can use 3 activation cheats, but actually they have 7 in their cup. That means that some of their formations may be activated twice and some formations will not activate at all. Certainly not all formations will be active on the 25th. During the day turn of the 25th, the American player may also play the air tactical cheat that causes interdiction and reduces the number of German actions by 1. This is a very effective way to simulate the chaos and confusion that were such a factor in this particular battle, because in some cases you will have a lot of units on the board, but you really cannot count on which units are going to be able to activate, and you do not know how reliable your units are going to be until you draw the cheats and you see what happens then. Units have 3 factors printed on their counter: attack, defense, and movement. Activated units will move up to their full movement allowance as modified by terrain, of course. And combat takes place during the movement phase. You do not have a specific combat phase. So after you activate a unit, the unit moves or attacks, and then the next activated unit will get to act. In order to attack adjacent units, you spend movement points, and you can decide how many movement points you want to spend. You may move a lot, spend not many movement points, and attack without penalty. You may move somewhat and then attack without penalties or advantages, or you may attack adjacent enemies that are adjacent to you at the beginning of the activation. You spend all of your movement points to do so, and you attack with a bonus. When you are attacking, you have to attack all units that are adjacent to your attacking unit. That unit would be forced to attack all of those units. However, you can receive support from your own units that are adjacent to the units that you are attacking, even though those adjacent units are not active in that specific activation. After you determine which attacking units will be supporting your attack, you calculate the total attack factor of the attacker or attackers, total defense factor of the defender or defenders. You find a ratio that will be used on the combat result table to find the column that you use in this table. Then you roll and you modify the result with pretty standard modifiers for the attacker. There's a negative modifier for being disrupted or to supply. Light attack, that means when you are not spending many movement points. Medium, some movement points. Heavy, a lot of movement points. The Germans have an advantage when attacking at night, the Allies by day, but only starting on the 25th. And the defender also has some modifiers based on terrain, actually positive modifiers given to the attacker if the defender is disrupted or isolated. And the advantage of supporting your attack with known active units, of course, is that your total attack factor may be much higher, but on the other hand, now the supporting units are involved in combat too and will suffer any negative result that the attack may generate. Another interesting thing here is that after you activate one of your units, when the unit is done with its activation, it is flipped to its spent side. And that spent side simply has lower values and zero movement factor, because of course you have moved already. And very important here, that unit has a smaller defense factor. That is important because that means that after you activate, you find yourself spent and not as good at defending as you were before that unit was activated. And now that unit has to stay there on its unactivated side until the next activation or the next turn. At that point, that unit is flipped back to its unspent side, and all units are flipped to their unspent side at the beginning of the next turn. I found this game to be very enjoyable. Very simple, very light on the rules, but with a couple of pretty captivating and affecting twists around an otherwise very linear core of ideas, even traditional ideas, the combat results table, for example. But the fact that your units get spent at the end of movement creates a lot of interesting challenges there. It makes it hard to plan a large attack, because yes, you can put a lot of units around the opponent, but by the time the units get there, they are spent, or at least the ones that you support your main attack are spent already. You have to spend attack movement points unless you want to launch a weak attack. Then you can wait until next turn when everybody's ready there, so you do not have to spend movement points. You can invest those in a larger and more powerful attack, but it takes time. And generally speaking, this follows a trend that I see is part of the philosophy of the design, which is to keep the game light on the rules, but with a lot of the decisions and challenges that simply have been built into the system. Look at the map. Simply the way in which the map is drawn and the net of paths works, that only will create challenges and problems about maneuvering, and you will have traffic jams. I didn't mention this, but when a vehicle moves through another vehicle, then there's an extra movement penalty to pay there. Getting everywhere in this thick forest is a problem, as it should be given the nature of the conflict and given the topic that we're playing here. The game is very suitable for solitaire gaming because of the different levels of randomness that are added to the system. I like all this, and I like how elegantly this has been built into the system, so you really do not have to worry so much about implementing all the rules and making sure you haven't forgotten about exceptions and sub-rules and exceptions to those sub-rules. It just works. You play, and without having to worry too much about a lot of things, you just are faced with the challenges. I like that very much. As the German side, you have an advantage at the beginning. You have to inflict a lot of damage and gain a lot of ground in the first couple of turns, because you know that things are going to turn bad pretty soon when the Allies start receiving air support in particular. And I think this is probably why the Battle of the Bulge is such a popular topic in war games, not just because of the relevance of the subject, but also because it has this interesting shift of perspectives that the two sides have to face. There are just challenges that both players have to face. For the Germans, it is about keeping up the initial momentum, and for the Allies, guess what? It is about slowing down the momentum. It is about limiting the damage that you receive, especially in the initial phases, so that then you can take maximum advantage from the different situation that you have in the second part of the game. In any case, this is a very entertaining game, one that I enjoyed a lot. Introductory game level, that's for sure, but also I found enough meat and enough interesting ideas here to keep the serious war gamer entertained too.